Pretty good.
What's going on, everyone? Travis Brown, also pictured below myself. Welcome to this Zoom meeting. I'm sorry, I'm thrown off by my own picture on here. Thanks, Alex. Also in this Zoom meeting is
what we put up with.
I know, right? Also in this Zoom is Robert Cessna of the Eagle, and most importantly, we have David Ubben of the Athletic joining us today to help break down a little bit of what's going on up in Knoxville as the Aggies get set for their season-ending matchup at Tennessee. Thanks so much for joining us, David.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Anytime.
You got it. You got it. So what just generally speaking, what can A&M fans expect with this Tennessee team? I know it's been a little bit of a disappointing season. What is it with the main storylines and what can A&M expect as they tune up for this game here in Knoxville?
Well, Tennessee's kind of trying to find themselves again. You know, they've gone away from Jarek Garantano, and they're playing two quarterbacks, Harrison Bailey, who, you know, sort of has that kind of unfortunate, like, savior tag where there's a lot of pressure put on him, probably unfairly for an 18-year-old kid. And then there's JT Shrout, who's got an NFL arm, but in a lot of ways was kind of an afterthought in this quarterback room from the fans anyway. But those two guys have kind of grabbed hold and trying to figure out what they have for the future. The offensive line has been kind of a disappointment, but Tennessee, you know, they just need a showing that fans can be proud of, because they've seen a lot this year that they haven't been. I mean, Kentucky beating them by 4 touchdowns on their home field. Second halves, third quarters have been an issue for Tennessee all year. They were up 13-0 at Arkansas, didn't score in the second half. They've given a defensive scores not as much since they went to the quarterback spot. So they have a bunch of problems everywhere. But right now, so much the focus is certainly the fans don't know. They're trying to figure that out. And, you know, A&M will, for better or worse, reveal a little bit of what they do have.
Yeah, but what first of all, what about the coach? I mean, I was on a radio show a couple days ago, and man, it sounds like the people up there, a lot of people are ready for the Jeremy Pruitt regime to end.
That is true. There's a lot of conversation about that. You know, we've seen the Rocket. There's a lot of fans that are out on him. I think when you look at his situation, I think there's pretty good cases to make a move and to not make a move. And that's, I think, where a lot of decision makers at Tennessee are. And this A&M game will have some influence there. I think right now the odds are better that he stays. But, you know, if they get beat 55-7 and then decide to go to a bowl game and lose to, you know, TCU or Memphis or something by double digits, that might change that conversation a little bit. So there's a big part of that. I think for Tennessee right now, you know, there's the case for keeping him, obviously, is Tennessee has been in this constant churn. You know, Butch Jones was here for quite a while, but, you know, Lane Kiffin for 1 year, Derek Dooley for, 2 or 3 years, then Butch Jones, and the churning has not worked. And for better or worse, you know, Tennessee right now, the infrastructure is stronger right now than it was when he inherited it. The results on the field have not been as good, but it's not like if you keep him another year, the bottom's going to fall out. You look at this roster, I just don't see that. I think they're probably going to be average again next year. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's some, some surprise hanging in there, but that's what Tennessee looks like. But the infrastructure is okay. So I think, you know, basically if you stick around for one more year, you're just kind of risking fan apathy. I don't think you're going to have a program that's in a lot worse shape. I don't believe that. But fan apathy, and especially in a year where you've had a $47 million, budget shortfall is kind of what you're staring at Tennessee. You have to answer the question, well, is it more expensive, which is going to be about $19 million to get rid of Jeremy Pruitt, who was extended for 2 more years and got a raise before the year, plus his staff. His buyout, I think, is 12.8. Add in his staff. Tennessee's got some really expensive assistants, a couple $1 million coordinators. So if you say, well, if we have full stadiums next year and fans don't care, is it more expensive to keep him than to fire him? South Carolina tried to answer that question. They said, yes, we want to get rid of Will Muschamp. Tennessee, I'm not sure. I'm not an economist. I think that, again, there are decent cases to do both things. And right now, there's still games to be played, and Tennessee's going to revisit that question when the season is actually over. And whether that's after a bowl game or not is yet to be determined, but we know they are playing Saturday. And Tennessee would do well. Jerry Pruitt Harris run off your home field, because if that happens again, then he may have more problems on his hands.
Because I was going to say they signed a top 25 recruiting class yesterday, David. I don't know how much that helps or whatever, but I did see by the
not at all.
Okay.
Well, the expectations are top 10 classes at Tennessee. People you say that's fair or not, but they've done it the last 2 years. They've had top 10 classes, and specifically this class. The numbers, we don't need to get into the weeds on how they rank recruiting classes. It was probably a little bit juiced, but Tennessee this summer was up at number 2. And they've had some decommitments once the season started, and they started losing games. They haven't been able to really get the big, impactful commitments. They've lost a few guys. Terrence Lewis is out of the boat. They lost to Marius McGee, who ended up at LSU. They might still get Terrence Lewis back, but, the class has kind of slid down, and now you're sitting there at 6th in the SEC, 15th. That's not good enough for what Tennessee wants to be. It's just not. You can be competitive there, but Jerry Pruitt was hired to beat Georgia, Alabama, and Florida. And he was hired to win championships at Tennessee. That's where they see them. Not every year, but contend, be in the mix. And, I can't be inside the playoff committee's room, but at 2-7, I have to wonder if Tennessee is going to be on the outside looking in when the playoff is played this year.
So speaking of the committee, you keep your finger on the pulse of all SEC. A lot of debate on the deservingness of A&M to be number 5, to be in the playoff, to should Cincinnati, should USC jump them. Where do you actually see, how does A&M fall in your eye test? And do you think that they're a team that should be overlooked or shouldn't be overlooked right now?
Well, I think it's tough because it's been a frustrating week. What people want from the committee, I think, is consistency. And they haven't shown that. Is Ohio State a better team than A&M? I think that's pretty clear. I don't know that there's going to find a lot of people who are going to say, oh, yeah, A&M's definitely a better team than Ohio State. They could probably beat Ohio State, 2 or 3 times out of 10, maybe. It would be, they might be able to compete there. But Ohio State's a better team. But Ohio State hasn't really proven anything. They haven't really. Their best win is Indiana. They've played 5 games, and we've seen them in the past. Especially in 2014, there was all this talk about the 13th data point. TCU Bell, they didn't have a national championship, even though they had really competitive, strength of schedule, and they were pretty similar. That they, Ohio State played that additional game. They played that 13th data point. You're all these things, and it reeks of inconsistency. It reeks of saying Ohio State. We know Ohio State's good. We know we've seen them. They've been somewhat dominant, but they weren't dominant against Indiana. They won that game by a touchdown. The reality is that A&M has better wins, and they've played more games. And if you're going to put Ohio State in there, then it's based on preseason expectations. It's based on what they did last year. It's not based on this year. And so I'm torn just as a college football fan, because do I want to see Ohio State play Clemson or Alabama or Notre Dame? Probably more so than I want to see A&M play those teams. I think Ohio State is a better team. But if you're going to say most deserving or 4 best, which seems to be, if that definition seems to fit whatever the committee wants it to from year to year. If you're trying to be consistent, it probably has to be A&M in that spot. I don't think it's going to be. So again, I'm torn because I as a college football fan, I probably want to see Ohio State play a little bit more. But as somebody who values some consistency and would like to see the committee do these things the same way every year and try to be as reasonable as possible, I don't know how you can make the case for Ohio State over A&M. Nobody's making the case for USC over A&M, and USC and Ohio State are not that different. The only difference is sort of perception, preseason hype, all of those things. Recruiting rankings to some degree as well, but the committee shouldn't be messing with recruiting rankings. What did you do this season on the field? That's what they're supposed to be talking about, and the Ohio State conversation seems to be about a lot more things that are not that, and that's not what the committee is there to do, I don't think.
And if you want to talk about consistency, if you're looking ahead, the consistency that could happen is look at a Florida team who lost to a bad LSU team. They drop one spot. So what does the loser of the ACC title game, how far are they going to drop? And if A&M wants to try to take one of those vacated spots, it might not be that vacated.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think it matters. I think a 2-loss Clemson is not getting into the playoff over A&M, I don't think. But if Notre Dame loses and they lose close, I think you're looking at an Alabama, Notre Dame, Clemson, Ohio State situation there. But it's interesting because for the last few weeks, there's been a lot of talk about, A&M and style plans. I just don't think that there's anything A&M can do to influence. They got to win. You got to win where you're not, don't give the committee an excuse. I mean, they have to win sort of convincingly. But I don't think there's a difference between a 20 or a 17-point win and a 50-point win for A&M. I just don't. It matters what happens everywhere else. And so I'm sure that's frustrating for A&M because they don't really control their own destiny. And, I think in some ways A&M, people didn't realize how good that Bama team was earlier in the year. And it was very easy early on when you're kind of still feeling out what Bama is good. And then A&M starts stacking up these wins. They beat Florida. And now you're sitting there and A&M's looking at 9-1 with their only loss to Bama. And it was a 4-touchdown loss, but Bama might beat some playoff teams by 4 touchdowns. So, it's a rough spot. I feel bad for A&M fans, but at least the $75 million man is getting it done this year. And first couple of years was looking a little shaky. They needed a big year this year. And, playoff spot or not, they've gotten it. This is what A&M hired Jimbo to do.
Speaking of that, if we go to the game a little bit, David, what would Tennessee have to do to beat A&M? What's Tennessee's maybe 1 or 2 strengths that maybe if they're going to pull the upset against A&M, how could they do that?
I just think A&M is a really bad matchup for Tennessee. Tennessee's offensive line has not really been as dominant as people thought that it might be. But on the flip side of that, they just have not been able to really affect the quarterback very consistently this year. I think they're going to blitz A&M a little bit more than they've blitzed this year. But they just don't have those impact guys in the front 7. And I think A&M's offensive line can dominate this game, control this game. And Tennessee – even if they're throwing against air, just has not really shown the ability to score as many points as they need to. I mean, I don't see a way that Tennessee, keeps A&M under 30 points in this game. And I don't see a way that Tennessee scores 30 in this game without, a defensive score or special teams, something crazy. I just think A&M is a really bad matchup for A&M or for Tennessee. And I think A&M wins this game fairly easily.
What's been your take on Kellen Mond this year? I know he's a little bit polarizing. He's a little bit not maybe the A&M fans' favorite guy, but then when you open up the record book, he's going to hold most all of them.
Yeah, I mean, there's enough throws in there and there's enough games in there where it gives the fans enough to gripe about. I mean, the LSU game was not pretty, and you see that. But at the end of the day, you look at the numbers, you look at him sitting there at 9-1. He's been enough to put him on the brink of the playoff. I mean, if you put Trevor Lawrence back there against Alabama, A&M still loses that game. So I understand fans' frustration, but I don't know sort of what, how many of these losses that A&M's taken over Kellen Mond's career can hang on Kellen Mond. Probably not that many. A couple, maybe. So I get the frustration. He's not Trevor Lawrence, but clearly, as he's shown, he's good enough to get into some pretty high spots.
David, what do you think about this year on the SEC? A little bit of a down year, typical year. What do you think about the whole conference?
Really bad year, I think, for the SEC. Man, the middle class is soft. You have Bama, an elite team. I'm not going to call them one of the best teams ever. It's hard in a year like this to really say that, but they're certainly in the last decade in the SEC. And the way their defenses come together, I mean, this is an elite Alabama team. There's some coaches, you hear them say, this is Saban's best team. Maybe. I don't know that I'm ready to go there yet. I mean, I guess they have to finish the job. Strangely enough, I really like that 18 team that lost Clemson in the game. I thought they had a really good argument as one of the best teams ever. Of course, you have to finish the job and not get rocked by Clemson. But you look around, I mean, A&M, pretty clearly won their way into being considered the second best team in the league. But you look at the East, I mean, Georgia's been disappointing. Some of that quarterback injuries, quarterback departures, all that stuff. Defense has been really banged. They have some real excuses that you can really say, well, it's not really their fault necessarily. But, Florida defense has had some issues. And then, Florida, the best team in the East, goes to LSU and loses to a bad LSU team. And then you look at that second, that middle class. I mean, Missouri, they're like your fifth best, I guess. And, I'm not a huge, Missouri. It's just, there's not, Vanderbilt's the only really, really bad team in the league. But that middle class, this has not been a very, very good year for the SEC. Alabama's there at the top, but just no one's been able to challenge them. And when you look around, it's not, it's not unreasonable to see why. They're just that much better than everybody else. And your sort of second-tier teams, the, A&M, Florida, Georgia haven't been great. And then, your middle class has not been – a lot of times that's the strength of the SEC. It has not been very good this year.
Okay, good or bad that Auburn got rid of Malzahn and the timing of it before the signing day?
Can I give him an incomplete? Is that cheating? Because it sort of depends on where you land. If they're going to hire Kevin Steele, I would have to say spending $21 million to hire your own coordinator, I don't know about that move. But, it depends on where they go, what they get, and even that, it's tough to really, measure. I've never had less confidence in my own ability to assess coaching hires because you get people laughing at Clemson and Dabo, laughing at LSU and at Orgeron. And last I checked, those two guys have championship rings on their fingers. And then you have people throwing a parade for Tom Herman and Scott Frost and Jim Harbaugh. And now they're ready to continue that parade out of town. So it's, I'm going to give Auburn an incomplete. I thought the timing of doing it now was odd because they've been talking about doing this for 4 years. It seems like has been living and gotten very comfortable in the hot seat. And so now in a budget shortage, $21 million, you've given him an extension. You just hired a new offensive coordinator. Now you want to get rid of him. The timing was get the Auburn sort of hand-wringing of we can be better than this because they might be able to.
So should they hire Bob Holt or you?
Yes.
So real quick, wrapping up for the game, let's get two more questions in. One being, we won't say maybe what's the keys to a Tennessee win because I don't know. I think we all don't know how reasonable that is. But what's the keys to Tennessee making this an unconvincing win for A&M?
Well, Tennessee can't get in their own way. I mean, that's been the biggest issue for them is just, kicking themselves constantly. I mean, defensive scores against Georgia. I mean, they were leading Georgia in Georgia at halftime, and they were 2-0. And you kind of looking around saying, like, is Tennessee about to, really become, a thing? Because you're like, man, because they stuff them on the goal line, which is, you don't do that. Nobody does that to Georgia very often. And they're taking this lead into halftime, and ever since then, second half of that game, defensive score, they can't really do much. Consecutive pick sixes against Kentucky. They put themselves in a 14-0 hole against Kentucky, which if there's one team in the country you can't do, or I guess the conference, you can't do that against. It's Kentucky. That's how they want to play. And then, of course, the same thing with Auburn. They have a chance to go down there and I forget if it was 10-13, I believe. You have a chance to go down there and take the lead, and you throw a pick in the end zone, and you let it get returned 100 yards for a touchdown, and all of a sudden you're down double digits. Tennessee just has made these catastrophic plays. And if you avoid those, Tennessee's season looks a little bit different. They had some random busts against Arkansas. Arkansas throwing the ball over the field on them, which not a lot of teams have done that in terms of down the field. So I think it's those two things. Don't give up the big play and don't sort of shoot yourself in the foot constantly. Because when Tennessee's managed to do that, like we saw that against Florida, they hung in there a little bit against Florida. And, A&M, they can do the same.
Cease, you got anything else?
No, that's a good synopsis there. I'm going to put a lot of money on A&M thanks to David. I mean, I can think about this deal.
Well, before we let
optimism not high in on Rocky Top.
let's go ahead and end with this, because there
Yes.
actually be a few A&M fans, because they haven't been to Tennessee, might try to travel up there to see what's going on, but actually mostly just asking for me and seats. What are some places in Knoxville that people need to visit, especially to eat?
Well, the Stock and Barrel burger is pretty up there. Abridged, also a very good burger. Calhoun's is cooler than it probably is good, but the river location, I mean, eating lunch or something, more so when there's on the river is pretty cool. I mean, the Tennessee River is awesome. Let's see, get some Cruise Farm ice cream. It's like a local dairy place, and they have downtown. Matt's Biscuit and Brew is like cold brew coffee and like biscuits that are really good downtown. K Brew has really good bagels and coffee. And I like if you're looking for something a little higher end, Chesapeake's really good. Those would be my recs.
Well, if there's one thing that describes Macy's, it's not high end. So we're going to end it there. Hey, before we go to, I got to pitch your the podcast that you're on several days a week, the Football and Grits podcast. I'm an avid listener. Y'all do great stuff. How can people get a hold of that and get a hold of you and your work?
Yeah, anywhere that you get podcasts, Football and Grits is there every weekday. It's been a lot of fun. I host it 3 days a week, so I'm kind of the lead host on there, and then we rotate out some hosts, so it's not weighing everyone down, but it's been really fun. That show is a lot of fun to do. Talking about the SEC 5 days a week, and you can listen to it ad-free on the Athletic app. And if you're not subscribed to the Athletic, you can do that. theathletic.com/grits. We got some great stuff. Ari Wasserman this week talked to I think 15 recruiting directors and did an anonymous survey about what recruiting is like and cheating and recruiting in a pandemic. It's really, really good. So I'd check it out.
Yeah, I read that one, and it was kind of funny to see most of the other conference people, the coaches they talked to were kind of like, oh, cheating. Maybe it happens. The SEC is like, yes, all the time. Yes. So, anyway, you got to check that out. I'm a Athletic subscriber myself. It's great stuff. Support them, and thanks so much, David, for giving us a few minutes of your time today.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.